Dad told me I was taking up space, and everyone laughed. Now I own a table. 5,000 miles away. Part 1. The table that changed everything. I never thought a family dinner could destroy your entire sense of self-worth. But there I was, 28 years old, sitting at my parents' dining table on Thanksgiving, when my father said the words that would echo in my mind for years to come. "Emma, could you scoot over? You're taking up too much space." Everyone laughed. My mother, my older brother Jake, my sister-in-law Caroline. Even my grandmother cracked a smile behind her wine glass. They thought it was a joke, a harmless comment about how I'd pulled my chair out too far, or how I'd spread my napkin across my lap in a way that somehow inconvenienced everyone. But I knew better. I'd heard variations of this my entire life. "You're too loud, Emma. Can you not be so much all the time? Why do you always have to make everything about you?" I was the family disappointment wrapped in a pretty package. At least, that's what they saw. A 28-year-old white woman who should have had it all figured out by now. Married, settled, preferably with a respectable career that they could brag about at their country club. Instead, I was single, working as a freelance graphic designer from my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, and apparently, still taking up too much space. That night, sitting in that dining room in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by people who shared my DNA but not my dreams, I made a decision. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for existing. I was going to find a place where taking up space wasn't a crime. It was a celebration. 3 weeks later, I bought a one-way ticket to Barcelona. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when I first realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't belong in the life everyone expected me to live. Part 2. The girl who tried to fit. I grew up in a picture-perfect house with white columns and a manicured lawn that my father obsessed over every weekend. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. My father, Richard Morgan, was a corporate lawyer at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. My mother, Patricia, was a former debutante who now spent her days organizing charity galas and garden parties. Jake, my older brother by 5 years, followed perfectly in Dad's footsteps. Yale, law school, a position at the same firm, a beautiful wife, and twin boys who already had spots reserved at the best prep schools. Then there was me. I tried, I really did. I went to a good college, Vassar, where I majored in art history because my mother thought it sounded refined. I dated the right boys, wore the right clothes, showed up to the right events. But something always felt off, like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. My junior year, I took an elective in graphic design. It was supposed to be an easy A way to balance out my heavier courses. Instead, it became the first thing in my life that made sense. I would stay up until 3 in the morning working on projects, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I discovered I could create entire worlds with color and shape, could tell stories without using a single word. When I told my parents I wanted to pursue design instead of going to law school like they'd planned, my father actually laughed. "That's cute, Emma, but let's talk about your real future." My mother was gentler, but no less dismissive. "Honey, that's a wonderful hobby, but you need something stable, something respectable." I compromised. God, I was always compromising back then, and got my master's in art history, working as a gallery assistant while freelancing on the side. My parents could tell their friends I worked in the arts, which sounded sophisticated enough at cocktail parties, even if they always changed the subject as quickly as possible. The comments started small, little jabs disguised as concern. "Are you sure you want that second helping? You know how the camera adds 10 pounds, and you'll want to look good in your bridesmaid dress for Caroline's wedding. Maybe don't mention your work at dinner tonight. The Henderson's daughter just made partner at Goldman Sachs." "You're 25, Emma. Don't you think it's time to get serious about finding someone? I tried to shrink. I tried to be less. I stopped talking about my work. I went on dates with men my mother set me up with. Investment bankers and lawyers who talked about their portfolios and asked me what I did in a tone that suggested they were humoring me. I smiled smaller, laughed quieter, took up less space at the table. It never worked. I was always too much and not enough at the same time. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once, the way these things usually do. Part 3. The summer before Barcelona. The summer I turned 27, Jake and Caroline bought a house in Darien, just 20 minutes from my parents. It was enormous. 5 bedrooms, a pool, one of those kitchens that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My mother was over the moon. "Finally," she said at the housewarming party, "one of my children is settling down properly." I was standing right there. That summer, every family gathering became a showcase for Jake's success. The twins' private school applications, the vacation home in the Hamptons they were considering, Caroline's interior designer who apparently was booked 2 years out but made an exception for them. And then there was me, still in my studio apartment, still taking freelance projects, still single. "You know," my Aunt Barbara said to me at a 4th of July barbecue, "I read an article that said women's fertility drops dramatically after 30. You might want to think about freezing your eggs." I was 27. "Emma's just focused on her career," my mother said, in that tone that suggested my career was an embarrassing phase I'd grow out of. "What career?" my Uncle Tom asked. "Isn't she doing some computer stuff?" I excused myself and spent 20 minutes in the bathroom, staring at my reflection and wondering when I'd become a stranger to myself. The girl looking back at me had perfectly highlighted blonde hair, subtle makeup, a Lily Pulitzer dress that my mother had bought me because, "You need to look put together, Emma." I didn't recognize her. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. I'd been working on a project for a Barcelona-based startup, a branding package for a sustainable fashion company. The founder, Sophia, and I had been emailing for weeks. She was passionate, creative, full of ideas that spilled out faster than she could type them. "You should visit," she'd written in her last email. "Barcelona would love you. We appreciate people with vision here." I stared at those words for a long time. People with vision. When was the last time someone in my family had said anything like that to me? I started researching. Cost of living in Barcelona. Visa requirements. What it would take to run my freelance business from abroad. The more I read, the more excited I became. For the first time in years, I felt something other than the dull ache of disappointment that had become my baseline. But I didn't do anything about it. Not yet. I was still trying to fit, still hoping that somehow, if I just tried hard enough, my family would see me. Then came Thanksgiving. Part 4. The Thanksgiving that changed everything. Thanksgiving was always a big production in my family. My mother spent weeks planning the menu, polishing silver, creating elaborate centerpieces. It was the one holiday where we all gathered without exception. My parents, Jake and Caroline and the twins, my grandmother, various aunts and uncles and cousins. I drove up from the city Wednesday night, my car packed with the homemade cranberry sauce I'd made because my mother had specifically requested it. I'd spent hours on it, using a recipe I'd found from a Barcelona chef, adding orange zest and cinnamon, wanting to prove that I could do something right. The house was already full when I arrived. Jake's car in the driveway, my grandmother's ancient Mercedes taking up too much space, ironically, cousins I barely knew sprawled across the living room. "Emma!" My mother air-kissed both my cheeks. "You're late. We were worried." I was 10 minutes past the time she'd told me to arrive. "Traffic on the Merit," I said, handing her the cranberry sauce. She looked at it like I'd handed her a dead fish. Oh, you made it from scratch? I already bought the canned kind. You know your father prefers it. My contribution was literally thrown away before dinner even started. The meal itself was the usual affair. My father held court at the head of the table, telling stories about his cases, with all the identifying details changed, of course, because attorney-client privilege. Jake chimed in with his own war stories from the firm. Caroline talked about the twins' developmental milestones. My grandmother offered commentary on everyone and everything with the brutal honesty that comes from being 86 and out of fucks to give. I tried to participate. I really did. I mentioned a project I was working on, a rebrand for a sustainable furniture company that was doing really innovative things with reclaimed materials. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, in the same tone she might use to acknowledge a child's finger painting. My Uncle Tom jumped in. "You know what's really innovative? The blockchain technology this new startup is developing. I invested early. Could make millions." And just like that, the conversation moved on without me. I excused myself to refill my wine glass, standing in the kitchen and taking deep breaths. This was fine. This was normal. This was just how it always was. "You okay?" I turned to find my cousin Rachel, one of the few family members I actually liked. She was a few years younger than me, a medical student who'd always been kind. "Yeah," I lied. "Just needed a breather." She squeezed my arm. "They don't mean to be like this, you know. They just don't understand." "Understand what?" "That not everyone wants the same life they have." I wanted to hug her. Instead, I just nodded and headed back to the dining room. That's when it happened. I was sliding back into my seat, which I'd pulled out slightly to make room, and my father, trying to reach for the gravy boat, looked at me with annoyance. "Emma, could you scoot over? You're taking up too much space." The laughter started immediately, like it was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. My mother's tinkling laugh, Jake's booming guffaw. Even Caroline giggled behind her hand. "Oh, Richard," my grandmother said, chuckling, "you're terrible." But my father wasn't smiling anymore. He was just looking at me with this expression of mild irritation, like I was a minor inconvenience he had to tolerate. And something inside me broke. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, more like a rope that had been fraying for years finally snapping, quietly, definitively. I stood up. "I need some air," I said. "Emma, don't be so sensitive," my mother called after me. "It was just a joke." I grabbed my coat and walked outside into the cold November night. I could see them through the dining room window. Already back to laughing and eating, my absence barely noticed. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Found Sophia's message from weeks ago. Hit reply. "How serious were you about me visiting Barcelona?" I typed. "Because I'm ready to buy a ticket." She responded within an hour. "Dead serious. When can you come?" I bought the ticket that night. Sitting in my childhood bedroom with its outdated Laura Ashley wallpaper and shelves still holding my high school trophies, one way to Barcelona, leaving in 3 weeks. It cost nearly $2,000, and it was the best money I ever spent. Part 5. The 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. You'd think telling your family you're moving to Spain would be a big dramatic announcement. In reality, it was more pathetic than anything. I waited until the Friday after Thanksgiving, when some of the holiday chaos had died down. I drove back up to Greenwich and asked my parents if we could talk. "Spain?" My mother looked confused. "For vacation? Now? It's almost Christmas, Emma." "Not for vacation. I'm moving there. For at least a year, maybe longer." The confusion morphed into something between horror and disbelief. Moving? You can't just move to Spain. What about your apartment? Your work? Your life? "My apartment is a sublet. I can break the lease." My work is freelance. I can do it from anywhere. And my life. I paused. My life here isn't working. My father finally looked up from his newspaper. This is ridiculous. You're running away. Maybe I am, I said. But I'm running toward something too. Toward what? Some fantasy about living in Europe? Emma, grow up. This is real life. You have responsibilities. What responsibilities? To show up at dinners where everyone treats me like I'm a disappointment? To keep trying to fit into a life that doesn't want me? My mother gasped. That's not fair. We love you. Do you? The question came out quieter than I intended. Do you love me? Or do you love the version of me you wish I was? Silence. When do you leave? My father finally asked. 3 weeks, December 18th. He folded his newspaper with precise, angry movements. Fine, make your mistake, but don't come crying to us when you realize the world doesn't cater to your whims. That was it. That was the blessing, or whatever you want to call it, that I got from my parents. Jake was more direct when I told him. You're being selfish. Mom and Dad are getting older. What if something happens and you're 5,000 miles away? They have you, I pointed out. You're the perfect son. I'm sure you'll handle everything beautifully. Don't be bitter, Emma. It's not attractive. Caroline, surprisingly, was the kindest. I think it's brave, she said quietly when Jake was out of the room. I wish I'd done something like this before I settled down. I looked at her perfect hair and her perfect clothes and her perfect life that suddenly didn't look quite so perfect. It's not too late, I said. She laughed, but there was something sad in it. Yes, it is. But for you, it's not. Go. The next 3 weeks were a blur. I sold furniture, packed boxes, said goodbye to friends who were excited for me, my real friends, and others who thought I was having some kind of breakdown, my parents' friends' daughters, who I'd been forced into friendship with. I met with a lawyer about visa requirements, opened an international bank account, researched apartments in Barcelona. Sophia connected me with a friend who had a room available in a flat share in the Gracia neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous. I'd be sharing with 2 other women, 1 bathroom, no air conditioning, but it was mine, my choice, my space to take up. December 18th came faster than I expected and slower than I wanted. My mother insisted on driving me to JFK, which turned into an exercise in passive-aggressive commentary. It's not too late to change your mind. You know, the Henderson's daughter just got engaged. To a doctor. Your father is very upset, even if he won't say it. I packed you some snacks. You probably won't like the food there. At the departure's drop-off, she finally broke down crying. I don't understand why you're doing this. Why you can't just be happy here. I hugged her, and for a moment, I felt like I was 10 years old again, seeking approval that never quite came. I love you, Mom, but I need to find out who I am without all of this. I gestured vaguely at everything, at Greenwich, at the expectations, at the weight of being a Morgan. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Call me when you land. I will. I didn't tell her that I'd probably turn my phone to airplane mode before I even got through security. I needed the space, even digital space, to breathe. Part 6. Landing in a new world Barcelona hit me like a beautiful slap in the face. I landed at El Prat at 7 a.m. on December 19th, exhausted and wired simultaneously. The airport was nothing like JFK, smaller, more manageable, filled with the rapid-fire sound of Spanish and Catalan that I'd studied on Duolingo, but couldn't actually understand when spoken at native speed. Sophia had offered to pick me up, but I'd insisted on taking the train. I needed to do this on my own, to prove to myself that I could navigate this new world without a safety net. The Arabus took me to Plaza Catalunya, and from there, I hauled my 2 massive suitcases onto the metro, following the route Sophia had sent me, Green Line to Fontana Station, then a 10-minute walk up into Gracia. It was a sunny December morning, warm enough that people sat at outdoor cafes in shirt sleeves. Christmas lights were strung across the narrow streets, but they were elegant, simple, none of the over-the-top suburban extravaganza I'd grown up with. Buildings rose up on either side of me, their facades painted in warm ochres and yellows and pinks, laundry hanging from balconies, plants spilling over railings. I'd never seen anything more beautiful in my life. The flat was on Carrere de Verdi, 4th floor, no elevator. I wrestled my suitcases up the stairs, sweating and cursing and laughing, because even the struggle felt like freedom. My new roommates, Lucia and Ana, were there to greet me. Lucia was Spanish, from Seville, working as a teacher. Ana was Brazilian, a dancer. Both were in their early 30s. Both had that effortless European style I'd spent years trying and failing to emulate in New York. "Welcome," Lucia said, pulling me into a hug like we'd known each other for years instead of having exchanged exactly 3 emails. "You must be exhausted. Come, we made coffee." Not, "Come, you should rest," or, "Come, let me show you your room." Just, "Come have coffee with us." We sat at a small table on the balcony, overlooking the street below. They asked me about my flight, about New York, about what brought me to Barcelona. And when I gave them the short version, needed a change, wanted to try something new, they didn't push. They didn't ask if I was running from something or whether I'd thought this through or what my 5-year plan was. Ana just nodded and said, "Barcelona is good for new beginnings." That first week was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying. I met with Sophia and her business partner Mark at their tiny office in Poblenou. They were younger than me, maybe 25, and they had that startup energy that burns bright and fast. They showed me their vision for the company, and I showed them mine for their brand, and within an hour we were all talking over each other, sketching ideas on a whiteboard, fueled by tiny cups of espresso that tasted like heaven. "This is exactly what we needed," Sophia said, looking at my concepts. "You understand what we're trying to do." When was the last time someone had said that to me about my work? When had anyone in my family ever said, "You understand"? I set up my workspace in my small room, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a window that looked out onto the street, and I could hear life happening below. Conversations in Spanish and Catalan, children playing, the guy who sold vegetables from a cart calling out his prices. I started taking walks in the evening, getting lost in the neighborhood's winding streets. I discovered squares I didn't know existed, each one with its own personality. Plaza del Sol, where young people gathered to drink beer and play guitar. Plaza de la Virreina, with its church and its market and its old men playing cards. Plaza de la Revolución, tiny and perfect, where I found a café called El Racó that made the best café amblette I'd ever tasted. I started going there every morning. The owner, Miquel, was in his 60s, gruff but kind. He didn't speak much English, and my Spanish was terrible. But we developed a system. I'd come in. He'd say, "Lo mismo?" The same? I'd nod, and he'd make my coffee exactly how I liked it, which I'd never actually told him. He'd just figured it out. One morning, about 2 weeks after I'd arrived, he set down my coffee and a palmera de chocolate I hadn't ordered. "Regalo," he said. "Gift." "Gracias," I managed. "Por qué?" He shrugged. "You look happy today, is good." Such a small thing, such a tiny gesture, but I found myself tearing up, because when was the last time someone had given me something just because I looked happy? I called my mother that night, as I'd been doing weekly. She asked me if I was ready to come home yet. "Mom, I just got here." "I know, but it's almost Christmas. You should be with family." I looked around my small room, at the life I was building brick by brick. I am with family, just a different kind. She didn't understand. I didn't expect her to. Part 7. Finding my rhythm. January in Barcelona was quiet in a way that felt sacred. The tourists had mostly gone home, the city returned to its people, and I began to understand the rhythm of my new life. I'd wake up around 8, go to El Raco for coffee, then work from my room or from a cafe until early afternoon. Lunch was a big deal here, not the sad desk salads of my New York life, but actual meals eaten slowly, with intention. Lucia, Anna, and I started a tradition of cooking together a few times a week. They'd teach me Spanish dishes, patatas bravas, tortilla española, escalivada, and I'd contribute what I knew, which admittedly wasn't much. My mother had never taught me to cook. That wasn't what Morgan women did. We hired people for that. But here, cooking wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about nourishment, about sitting together and talking about our days, about taking up space at a table where everyone was welcome. The work started coming in steadily. Sophia and Mark's fashion company was taking off, and they referred me to other Barcelona startups. I built websites, designed logos, created brand identities for companies that were trying to change the world in small ways. And the best part? People valued my work. They paid me fairly, on time, without making me feel like I should be grateful for the opportunity. I was making more money than I ever had in New York. But more than that, I was making friends. Real friends. Not the forced friendships of shared zip codes and social class. There was Clara, a photographer from Madrid who I met at a co-working space. There was James, a British teacher who'd been in Barcelona for 5 years and showed me the best hidden spots in the city. There was Yuki, a Japanese illustrator whose work I admired on Instagram and who, it turned out, lived 3 streets away from me. We'd meet for vermouth on Sunday afternoons, sitting in the sun in some plaza, drinking sweet vermouth and eating olives and just existing. No one asked me what my 5-year plan was or when I was getting married or why I wasn't using my degree. We talked about art and politics and travel and stupid TV shows and everything and nothing. One Sunday in February, we were at a bar in Sant Antoni, and Clara said something that stuck with me. "I love how Barcelona collects people," she said. "All of us came here from somewhere else, looking for something, and the city just makes space for us." "Takes up space," I said quietly. "What?" "Nothing. Just something someone once said to me." But I thought about it for days. Barcelona made space. It took up space with its architecture, its noise, its vibrant insistence on living fully, and it invited you to do the same. I started taking more risks in my work. I pitched ideas that were bolder, more creative. I stopped second-guessing every decision, stopped trying to make myself smaller and more palatable. If a client didn't like my vision, I walked away. There were plenty of others who did. I also started taking up space in other ways. I took flamenco classes. I was terrible, but I didn't care. I joined a hiking group that explored the mountains around Barcelona. I said yes to things that scared me. A solo trip to Valencia, a presentation at a design conference, a date with a Catalan architect who was handsome and kind and completely wrong for me. But the date itself was lovely. I bought new clothes, finally abandoning the Lily Pulitzer uniform of my old life. I cut my hair shorter, added some blonde highlights that were for me, not for anyone else's approval. I got a small tattoo on my wrist, just 3 simple lines that represented the mountains I could see from Barcelona on clear days. And when my mother saw it on a video call, her face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on resigned disappointment. "Emma, why would you do that to yourself?" "Because I wanted to," I said simply. It was the first time I'd done something permanent to my body that was entirely my choice, with no consideration for what anyone else would think. It felt like coming home to myself. Part 8. The table spring came to Barcelona in an explosion of color. Jacarandas bloomed purple along the streets. Cafes opened their windows wide. The city seemed to vibrate with possibility. I'd been in Barcelona for 4 months, and my old life was starting to feel like a dream, or maybe a nightmare, that I'd finally woken up from. I video called my parents dutifully every other week. Jake and I barely spoke. My grandmother, surprisingly, sent me postcards, actual physical postcards, with notes like, "Good for you, dear," and "Your grandfather would have liked Barcelona." In April, Sophia and Mark opened a small storefront for their fashion company in Elborn, and they asked me to help design the space. It wasn't just about graphics anymore. They wanted me involved in the entire aesthetic experience. "You understand the vision," Sophia kept saying. Those words never got old. One Saturday, I was walking through the Sant Antoni flea market, looking for vintage pieces that might work for the storefront, when I saw it. The table. It was sitting in the corner of one vendor's section, clearly overlooked. About 6 feet long, made of dark wood that had been worn smooth by time. The legs were carved with intricate details, and the surface, though scratched and marked, had a warmth to it that stopped me in my tracks. The vendor, an old man with kind eyes, noticed me staring. "Es bella, no? Beautiful, no?" "Sí," I said. "De donde es?" "Where is it from?" He launched into rapid Spanish that I only partially understood, but I caught the gist. The table was from an old farmhouse in Catalonia, probably 100 years old, used for family meals for generations. "How much?" I asked. He named a price that was more than reasonable. I should have negotiated. That's what you did at flea markets. But I didn't want to. This table was worth every euro. "I'll take it," I said. Getting it home was an adventure. The vendor helped me load it into a truck, for an additional fee, and then Lucia, Anna, Clara, James, and Yuki all showed up to help me carry it up 4 flights of stairs. We were laughing and cursing and sweating, and when we finally got it into our flat's main living space, we all just stood there, staring at it. "It's perfect," Anna said. It was. It fit perfectly in the space, like it had always been meant to be there. That night, we christened it with dinner. We cooked everything we had in the kitchen: pasta, salad, bread, wine, cheese, fruit. We squeezed 8 people around that table, which was way too many, but we made it work. We ate and drank and talked until 2 in the morning, and at some point I looked around at these people, my chosen family, and felt something I'd never felt at my parents' dining table. I felt like I belonged. Lucia caught me getting emotional and raised her glass. "To Emma's table. To Emma's table," everyone echoed. "It's not just my table," I protested. "It's all of ours." "No," Clara said firmly. "It's yours. You brought it here. You made this space." James added, "You took up space." He said it like it was a good thing, like it was something to be proud of. I thought about my father's words at Thanksgiving. "You're taking up too much space." And I thought, good. I'm taking up exactly the space I deserve. Part 9. Summer and Revelations. By summer, my life in Barcelona had fully taken shape. My freelance business was thriving. I'd even hired a part-time assistant, a design student from Elisava who reminded me of myself a few years ago, full of ideas and energy. The storefront for Sophia and Mark's company had opened to great success, and I'd been approached by 2 other businesses wanting similar design work. I'd also started teaching a weekend workshop on brand identity at a local creative space. It was terrifying at first, standing in front of people, claiming authority, taking up space as an expert. But the students loved it. They asked questions and challenged my ideas and made me better at what I did. My apartment was truly home now. That table had become the center of everything. We hosted dinners multiple times a week, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous. People would just show up with ingredients or wine, and we'd create meals together. The table had marks from hot pans and wine stains and scratches from that time. Someone carved their initials into it, drunk after a particularly long night, and every mark told a story. I documented some of these dinners on Instagram, not in a curated, aspirational way, but just honest snapshots of the food, the people, the life I was building. It started as a way to show my family that I was thriving, a subtle, "See? I made the right choice," that I probably didn't need to prove, but wanted to anyway. What I didn't expect was for it to resonate with others. People started following my account. Not thousands, but hundreds, then thousands. They sent me messages. "This looks like the life I want to build," and "How did you find the courage to start over?" and "I'm 35 and stuck. Is it too late for me?" I started writing longer captions, sharing more of my story. I told them about the Thanksgiving table where I was told I took up too much space. I told them about buying a one-way ticket and being terrified and doing it anyway. I told them about this table, 5,000 miles from Greenwich, where I'd finally learned what it meant to belong. The response was overwhelming. Women mostly, but not all, who felt trapped in lives they'd built to please other people, who'd been told they were too much or not enough, who'd been shrinking for so long they'd forgotten their real size. One message in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Ohio. "I'm 42, married with 3 kids, and I just realized I've spent my entire adult life taking up as little space as possible. I don't think I can move to Barcelona, but maybe I can find my table anyway. Thank you for showing me it's possible." I cried when I read that. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not everyone needed to move to Spain or make some dramatic gesture, but everyone deserved to take up space, to have a table, literal or metaphorical, where they belonged exactly as they were. In July, my parents announced they were coming to visit. My mother couched it as wanting to see what Emma's been up to. But I knew the real reason. They wanted to confirm that I was struggling, that this Barcelona experiment had been a foolish mistake, that I was ready to come home and resume the life they'd planned for me. I had exactly 2 weeks to prepare. Part 10. The Visit. My parents arrived on a Saturday in late July. Barcelona was hot and crowded with tourists, which I knew would immediately put my mother in a bad mood. I picked them up from the airport, watching them emerge from arrivals looking slightly rumpled and disoriented. My father in khakis and a polo shirt, my mother in linen pants and a silk blouse that was probably already sticking to her in the heat. "Emma!" My mother pulled me into a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "You look different." I was wearing a sundress I'd bought at a market. My hair was longer and lighter from the sun, and I probably did look different. I felt different. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." My father nodded. "Where's the car?" "We're taking the Airbus and then the metro." He blinked. "The subway? With luggage?" "Trust me, it's easier than driving in Barcelona." I could see him calculating whether to argue, then deciding it wasn't worth it. They followed me onto the bus, looking around at the other passengers, the backpackers, the locals, the families, like they'd landed on another planet. On the metro, my mother held onto the pole with 2 fingers, as if touching it fully might give her a disease. "This is how you get around every day?" "Usually I walk. It's beautiful here." "I'm sure," she said in a tone that suggested she wasn't sure at all. I'd given up my room for them. Lucia had insisted, and we'd moved my stuff temporarily into her space. Climbing 4 flights of stairs with their luggage, I could hear my father breathing heavily behind me. "No elevator?" he managed. "Welcome to Europe." The flat was clean, but lived in. Anna was at a dance rehearsal, but Lucia was there, warm and welcoming in a way that made my mother immediately territorial. "You must be Emma's parents," Lucia said. "Welcome. We're so happy to have Emma here. She's been wonderful." My mother's smile was tight. "That's lovely. Emma, can we see your room?" I showed them what had been my room for the past 7 months. It was small but bright, with my work set up on a desk by the window, some of my finished projects on the walls. "This is it?" my father said. "This is it." "It's very cozy," my mother managed. Cozy was her word for small and inadequate. "Where do you meet with clients?" my father asked. "Coffee shops? Co-working spaces? Their offices. Most of my meetings are virtual anyway." He looked around like he was cataloging all the ways this life was insufficient. "And you're making enough money to live?" "More than enough, actually. My business has grown significantly since I moved here." This seemed to surprise him. "Good." We went out for lunch. I took them to a nice restaurant in Ixample, upscale enough that my mother couldn't complain, but still authentically Catalan. They ordered the most familiar items on the menu and picked at their food, while I explained the business I'd built, the clients I was working with, the workshops I was teaching. "That's all very nice, Emma," my mother said. "But is it sustainable? What's your long-term plan?" "My long-term plan is to keep doing work I love with people I respect." "But what about stability? Benefits? Retirement?" "I'm handling all of that. I have international health insurance. I'm contributing to a retirement account, and I'm actually making more than I did in New York." My father looked skeptical. "Doing graphic design?" "Yes, doing graphic design, building brands, helping companies succeed. It's real work, Dad." I didn't say it wasn't. But the implication hung in the air. It wasn't real work to him. It would never be real work. That night, I'd organized a dinner at the flat. I wanted my parents to meet the people who'd become my family, to see the life I'd built. Lucia, Anna, Clara, James, Yuki, Sophia, Mark. They all came, bringing food and wine and their generous, open energy. My parents sat at my table, the table I'd found at the market, the table that had become the center of my world, and they looked uncomfortable. Too many people talking over each other, laughter too loud, conversation switching between English and Spanish and Catalan. James was teaching my father some Spanish phrases. Clara was showing my mother photos of her recent work in Morocco. Yuki was explaining Japanese aesthetics to anyone who would listen. It was chaotic and beautiful, and exactly what dinner should be. At one point, Sophia raised her glass. A toast to Emma, for having the courage to build the life she wanted, and for helping all of us build ours. Everyone cheered. My parents clapped politely. After dinner, as people were leaving and my mother was helping clear plates, something I'd never seen her do at home, she said quietly, "These people really care about you." "Yes," I said. "They do. It's just, this isn't the life we imagined for you." I stopped loading the dishwasher and looked at her. "I know, but it's the life I imagined for myself." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" It was the first time she'd asked me that in years, maybe ever. "Yes, Mom, I'm happy." She nodded slowly, and I saw something in her face. Maybe understanding, maybe envy, maybe both. The next day, I took them around Barcelona. We walked through the Gothic quarter, saw La Sagrada Familia. My mother was impressed despite herself. Had coffee in Plaza Real. My father complained about the heat and the crowds. My mother worried about pickpockets. But I also caught them smiling sometimes, caught them looking around at the beauty of the city with something like wonder. On their last night, we went to El Raco, my cafe, the one I went to every morning. Mikel made a fuss when I brought my parents, insisting on making special coffee for them, bringing out his best pastries. Your daughter, he said to my father in broken English, she is very loved here, very respected. My father didn't know what to say to that. After, walking back to the flat, my mother linked her arm through mine. I still don't understand why you had to come all the way to Spain to find yourself, she said. But I can see that you have. Found yourself, I mean. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't approval exactly. But it was acknowledgement. And from her, that was something. At the airport the next morning, my father surprised me by pulling me into a hug. You're doing well, he said. I'm glad you're doing well. It was the closest he'd ever come to saying he was proud of me. After they left, I went back to the flat and sat at my table. Lucia found me there, staring at the wood grain. How are you feeling? She asked. I don't know. Relieved? Sad? Validated? She sat down next to me. You don't need their approval, you know. I know, but it's nice to have it anyway, or close to it. She smiled. You've built something amazing here, Emma, with or without their blessing. I looked around at the flat, at the life I'd created, at the table where I'd learned to take up space. Yeah, I said, I have. Epilogue. 1 year later. It's been a year since my parents' visit, and I'm still in Barcelona. My apartment now, though, it's different. After 1.5 years of sharing, I decided it was time for my own space. I found a small flat in Gracia, 2 bedrooms so I could have a proper office. And when I moved, I took the table with me. It's in my dining area now, which is just a section of the main room, but it's mine. I still host dinners, still gather people around it. But I also sit at it alone sometimes, working or reading or just drinking my morning coffee. And I think about the journey that brought me here. My business has grown beyond what I imagined. I have regular clients across Europe and the US. I've spoken at design conferences in London and Berlin. I've hired 2 full-time employees, designers who remind me of the person I was trying to become when I left New York. Jake and Caroline got divorced. My mother called me crying about it, asking if I could come home to help support Jake through it. I said no, gently but firmly. I suggested he come visit me instead, to get some distance. He never did, but the invitation stands. My grandmother died in the spring. I flew home for the funeral, and it was strange to be back in Greenwich, to sit at my parents' dining table again. It felt smaller somehow. Or maybe I just felt bigger. At the reception after the funeral, one of my aunts asked me when I was going to stop playing around in Europe and come home. Before I could answer, my mother, surprising everyone, including herself, said, Emma isn't playing around. She's built a successful business in Barcelona. We're very proud of her. I nearly dropped my glass. Later, in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, my mother said, I've been thinking about what you said. About how we love the version of you we wished you were, instead of who you are. You were right. I'm sorry for that. I hugged her, and this time, it lasted longer than 2 seconds. It's not too late, I told her, to get to know the real me. I'd like that, she said. My father still doesn't fully get it. He probably never will. But he's stopped making comments about when I'm coming home, stopped questioning my choices. Progress comes in small steps. Last month, Jennifer, the woman from Ohio who'd messaged me about finding her table, sent me a photo. She'd started an art class, something she'd wanted to do for 20 years. Not Barcelona, she wrote, but it's my table. Thank you for showing me it's okay to take up space. I printed that message and pinned it above my desk, because that's what this story is really about. Not about moving to Barcelona or buying a table or proving my family wrong. It's about claiming the right to exist fully, to take up space, to build a life that fits who you actually are instead of who people think you should be. I'm 29 now. I have a business I love, friends who feel like family, a city that makes space for dreamers and wanderers and people who don't quite fit in their original boxes. I have a table, my table, that's 5,000 miles from the one where I was told I took up too much space. And you know what? I do take up space. I take up space with my work, my laughter, my presence, my unapologetic joy. I take up space at my table, in my city, in my life, and it turns out there's room enough for all of us to do the same. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I go sit at my table. I trace my fingers over the marks and scratches, each one a story, a memory, a moment of connection. And I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, about my father's words, about the laughter that followed. I don't hate them for it anymore. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful, because that moment, that painful, humiliating moment, was the catalyst I needed to change my life. My father thought he was putting me in my place. Instead, he pushed me toward finding my place, and my place is here, at this table, in this city, in this life I built from scratch. Last week, I got an email from a magazine asking if they could interview me about my journey, about leaving everything behind to start over in Barcelona. They'd found me through my Instagram, through the story of the table and the life I'd built around it. I said yes, because this story, my story, isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every person who's ever been told they're too much or not enough, who's ever felt like they don't quite fit, who's ever dreamed of a life bigger than the one they were given. We all deserve a table where we belong. We all deserve to take up space. And if you can't find that table in the life you have, then maybe, like me, you need to go find it somewhere else. Maybe it's across the ocean. Maybe it's across town. Maybe it's just in a different way of thinking about yourself. But it's out there, waiting for you. Your table, your space, your life. You just have to be brave enough to claim it. Author's note: 6 months later. I'm writing this edition from my apartment in Barcelona, looking out at the street below where life continues in its beautiful, chaotic way. It's been 6 months since I wrote the epilogue, and things have continued to evolve in ways I never could have predicted. The magazine article came out, and suddenly people were interested in my story. Not just interested, invested. I started getting messages from women, and men, and non-binary folks, all over the world who saw themselves in my journey. Some of them made their own dramatic changes. Others made smaller shifts, taking an art class, saying no to family obligations that drained them, buying their own version of the table. I started a podcast called Taking Up Space, where I interview other people who've claimed their right to exist fully and unapologetically. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times. My parents listened to the first episode. My mother called me afterward, crying. "I'm listening to you talk about your childhood," she said, "and I'm hearing things I never heard before. I'm seeing how much we hurt you." Mom? No, let me finish. I thought we were doing everything right. I thought we were preparing you for the world, but we were actually teaching you that you weren't enough as you were. I'm so sorry. We're doing therapy together now, via video calls. It's hard and uncomfortable, and sometimes I leave sessions feeling worse than when I started. But we're trying. That's something. Jake reached out too, after his divorce was finalized. He asked if he could visit. I said yes, and he came for a week in October. We sat at my table, the table that started everything, and he told me he envied me. "You were brave enough to leave," he said. "I've been miserable for years, but I was too scared to change anything." "It's not too late," I told him, echoing what Caroline had once said to me. "He's thinking about it." about what his life could look like if he stopped trying to be the perfect son and started trying to be himself. The business continues to grow. I'm opening a small design studio in Barcelona, bringing on partners, creating something bigger than just my solo freelance work. We're focusing on working with companies that prioritize sustainability, social justice, and authentic human connection. And the table? It's still the center of everything. Last month, we hosted a Friendsgiving dinner, a mix of Americans missing home and locals curious about American traditions. We squeezed 16 people around that table, and it was loud and messy and perfect. At one point, Clara said, "Remember when Emma first brought this table home? We thought she was crazy for spending so much on something so old." "I was crazy," I said. Or maybe I was finally sane for the first time in my life. Lucia raised her glass. To Emma's table, to Emma's courage, to everyone finding their place. We drank to that. Sometimes I still think about that Thanksgiving, about sitting at my parents' table and hearing those words. "You're taking up too much space." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd kept trying to shrink myself to fit into their world. But mostly, I'm just grateful that I didn't. Because this life, this loud, messy, imperfect, beautiful life, is mine. Every inch of space I take up is earned and claimed and celebrated. And that table, 5,000 miles from where my journey began, holds all of it. The dinners and the laughter and the tears and the growth. The friends who became family. The work that became purpose. The woman I was trying to become and the woman I finally am. I'm taking up space, and there's room for you too. Come find your table, it's waiting.